Hello, welcome to the Seychelles Shallows Survey. This is a survey of the 90 some odd locations within the territory of the nation of Seychelles, where Google Earth reports an area with a depth of 1 meter or less. Okay, this is the very first, this is 14,000 hectares that show up as 1 meter and seem by all rights to be quite forestable by our standards. The second one is actually roughly the same, 14,000 hectares in size. And its ocean exposure is to the west, so it is tightly exposed, but probably constructible and operable for marine forestation or other construction in the shallows. This is 12,000 hectares with a northwest exposure. Quite buildable, and some deep protected shallows, as you can see on the right-hand side. Here we have 11,000 hectares with an exceptionally deep southern exposure. This could be very valuable in the area of deep carbon sequestration. While it could be more difficult to construct and maintain, it may be well worth it. Here's 11,000 hectares of similarly southern exposure, but really good to the north. You have some good deep protected shallows where the deep ocean waves can't really penetrate that well. This would be a very nice place to build. That's 11,600 and some odd hectares. This one is a deep enclosed body, both southern and some western exposure. Quite good area, just over 11,000 hectares at the 1 meter depth. But to the north and east, you might find, if you want to build to more than 1 meter of depth, that there's quite a bit more available to you. Okay, this is a rather scattered area, but it's, I think you'll find that the 2 meter and 10 meter depths are quite large around this, so it should be fairly well buildable. And here you're just over 10,400 hectares, something like that. This is a 10,350 hectare region, right on southern exposure, good deep water exposure for deep carbon sequestration. And probably most of these southern exposed should be good for nutrient upwelling, which could be very beneficial. And here we have 7,000 hectares, little northern exposure, quite a nice area, very buildable, but it does have some wash off into depth going to the north, and we'll get more into that during our current flow survey. Now here we have a much narrower plateau, and we're strung right along the western side of the plateau with right at about 7,000 hectares, 1 meter buildable. This should be really good for nutrient flows. Worth looking into the more in-depth survey coming later. Now this 6,000 hectares is right up against the eastern, semi-protected though. This should be interesting. We haven't done any metering to see what kind of nutrient flows it gets, but it could be one of the better locations to build based on what we know so far. That's just under 7,000 hectares. And here we have a place fully nutrient exposed, basically exposed on all sides with deep ocean to the south. This should be a heavy sequestration opportunity. When the organic carbon gets brought in here, it can go deep into the deep ocean very quickly, and most of that organic carbon will make its way into mineralization. And if it does reappear in the ecosystem, by failure to mineralize, it will be thousands of years into the future. So this is a good one. And plus, there's an interesting area here where one can do some deep water stuff. So we'll provide the more stratas of depth and the possibility there to do some multi-layer seagrass and things like that. So this could be one of the most productive, even though it's only 6,000 hectares, 6,700 hectares in size. And here we have a 6,670 some odd hectares, strung across the southern exposure, very deep southern exposure, and it looks quite buildable and attractive. And quite nearby, up the same upwelling ridge, we have here 6,400 hectares. Very buildable, fairly attractive. Now this is nearby to an island that's populated, so there may be limitations in what you can do. There may also be species, but it is an independently buildable in that sense, with great exposure to upwelling and maybe even better infrastructure support with the local island that it's next to, although I'm not sure whether there's a running airstrip there or not, but there certainly could be. Here's another situation where we have a shallows that happens to be adjacent to a beautiful island, and may in fact be easier to build because of the infrastructure available at the island, although there may be challenges. If there's resorts on the island or people living there, they may have an opinion about what they would like to see off their shore, but they may also love trees and carbon sequestration and eagerly want to be part of this. But that's the situation with this 5,300 hectare group. Here's a similar area. North of an island with an airstrip on it. but well exposed to deep water and to nutrient upwellings. It's about a good 5,000 hectares, something certainly buildable. Here we have 4,900 hectares, fairly isolated. Got good exposures, deep swell breaking shallows adjacent, so it might have areas where it's easier to build permanent structures, and certainly all forestable. Here we have 3,900 hectares on its with a north-facing exposure, northeast, and good swell protection from the southwest. Looks quite buildable. This is a solid 3,800 hectare group where, as far as we know, it looks good buildable, good nutrient exposure and whatnot to the south and southwest, and certainly to the west. And here we have 3,700 hectares, quite good western exposure, eastern swell protection, deemed by our analysis to be highly buildable and not within sight of any existing resorts or residences. This should be a very nice 3,700 hectare ranch. Some good exposures and some good protection. No red flags with this. Looks like a good one. Here we are with deep water southwest exposure, good for a deep carbon scenario, and the curvature of the southwest means good, probably means good upwelling. We'll have to look into that in the upwelling survey. Okay, there's another 3,000 hectares, quite nice, with exposure to the southeast and northeast. And here we have much less exposed, deep within the median shallow area of its plateau. Very attractive for maybe something with resorts, exotic scuba opportunities and such, along with maybe heavy-duty seagrass and mangroves. Something out with a little more exposure, 2,800 hectares, a triangular shaped property, quite buildable. There's a 2,400 hectare. These are running about $1.5 million per square kilometer, or $150,000, $15,000 per hectare. Typical construction costs. You'll want to get, we'll provide you a more accurate quote on your property once you've chosen one, obviously. the 2,400 hectare easternly exposed. Should have good nutrient upwelling. Now we're getting into properties that are 2,000 hectares or smaller, but there are certainly plenty of them, and these may be more affordable for people that don't have as much money to invest. And quite a number in the 2,000 hectare range. Now we're getting down to the 1,700 hectare. Now, if you have these, that's still 1,700 hectares, and now we go to the 1,500 hectare range. Now, these are all known to have solid shallows. Almost all carbonate plateau, obviously. As we get smaller in the sizes, it becomes more and more random as to the exact shape and location because the data we have is imperfect. But at 1,500 hectares, we're pretty sure. Although the exact shape may not be as described on Google Earth, we expect it to be close. These are all greater than 1,000 hectares. This is a great isolated island with a deep exposure on every direction. Remember, when I refer to them as island, we're talking about submerged islands. As far as we know, there's nothing above the surface here. This is 1,200 hectares of 1 meter deep shallows. Here it's highly protected within a large plateau. Here it's totally unprotected. Out on its own, you have maximum nutrient upwellings. You may have heavier flows. Part of the reasons why these areas are desertified with nothing growing on them is as the plateaus grow up to the surface with the coral or whatever, the shallower it gets, the higher the water flows are across it from the prevailing currents. And so these water flows may carry with them a lot of sand, and it basically sandblasts any attempt for any life. So there isn't anything permanent or long-term living. There's migratory species that flow by, but you don't have any way for things to grab hold. And that's the first thing we change when we start putting up stanchions and everything, is now life can begin to take hold and build permanent ecosystems where colonies can dwell. And now we're at some of the smaller ranch opportunities. This will be 900 hectares. And so it may be more buildable, more affordable to be built by a smaller investor or consortia. There's 960 hectares. $920 hectares. $800 hectares. Now we're getting to the point where it's a little iffy as to how Google Earth has mapped this. Okay, to be honest, I'm not sure I believe that there's a shallow exactly that shape, although we can be confident that there's probably more than 800 hectares of shallows here. There's an associated island and whatnot, but so that one might not meet isolation criteria, but there are plenty more. Here we have full isolation and 780 hectares. $760 hectares. $630 hectares, 640 roughly. This seems to be dubious and artifactual, but we're pretty sure there's 600 hectares of shallows in this region. There's a 500 hectare area. $480. $417. $407. $350. $303. $296. $295. $226. $200. $195. $174. $158. $157. $120. There's deep within a plateau. Could be an easy one to build. $93 hectares. 87 hectares. 81 hectares out in the deep. 70 hectares. 60 hectares. 53 hectares. 51 hectares. 45 hectares. Fairly isolated, 45 hectares. That would be a nice place. I mean, if you can't afford to build out more than 50 or 100 hectares, there are some good opportunities here. There's 41 hectares. $40 hectares. 39 hectares. Now the accuracy of these small ones are really tough. Some of this is very artifactual. There'll be these cuts into the shape aligning with the path of the satellite above, and you kind of know that the areas under the Earth are probably more curved than, and would not, there's no reason they would align with the satellite paths. They're very likely artifacts from the satellite trying to create data from very faint information. This one, for instance, is 28 hectares. Is it really a rectangle? I doubt it. There probably are 28 hectares there. When it comes to averaging and guessing, the satellite data is pretty good. That was 28. And here we are with 17 hectares. At this point, I could say there's definitely some shallows there. I wouldn't put a lot of money on what number. When you get down to 10, 15, 20 hectares, you got a satellite at a very high elevation, getting very dirty and smeared images. This looks like maybe 15 hectares. That looks like, it looks like maybe 19 hectares. And here's one for roughly 10 hectares maybe. And these last two are the two smallest areas that may in fact be entirely artifactual. Let me see if I can even get it to go there. Okay, this is all right, that looks like about 8 hectares. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about 82,000 square meters. And then the smallest one that I bothered to record, and maybe I probably shouldn't have, is this little peak that's 34,000 square meters, maybe 20, 30 hectares. And that pretty much wraps it up. And there are more small ranches probably available if all you can do it, you know, $15,000, $20,000 a hectare. And we're talking about the cost of actually converting the property. The nation of Seychelles may in fact, most certainly will expect to be paid for the land that they, or for the areas that they do make available in a lease or a purchase format. And so that would be, of course, on top of whatever the cost of your construction is. But whether you want to invest $5 or $7 billion or a couple million, there's opportunities out here. Bear in mind, you're way out in the ocean. You're in the deep Indian Ocean on a giant plateau complex that is home to the, as far as we can tell, wonderful nation of Seychelles.